Hi Elke, this is your Monday afternoon art lesson, and it's my third try to do this because the first try the memory card got full and it wouldn't go any further than 5 minutes, and then I started again and the batteries went out, so I just came back from buying some more batteries, and now here is a piece of sculpture. I happen to have this on the shelf of a face, and I'm going to talk about, on this lesson, proportions. Proportions being the comparison of parts to other parts, or the proportions are referred to the overall height to the width of an object. So we say that we talk about the proportions of lots of different things, like a table has a certain proportion, a very long skinny table, we're talking about the proportions. Now, with this piece of sculpture, it was actually a piece of wood carved to look like a face, then covered with plaster and then painted. And so paint is peeling off, and that's why it has these odd patches. But what I want to talk about is, if you had made this piece of sculpture of a face, and you were in a sculpture class and you showed it to the teacher might say, well, I think the mouth is too small compared to the eyes. Well, that comment would be a comment about the proportions of the parts of the face, so that someone might think that the distance from here to here is too small compared to the distance from here to here. Think of your own face. Think of the size of the eye and the width, how it compares to the mouth. That's a comparison of proportions. But when we talk about the proportions of the face, generally what we're talking about is this distance from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin, from the outside of the cheek to the outside of the cheek, and the rectangle made by those dimensions. So in this case, we have a tall, skinny, proportioned face, because usually the face would be more, not square, but more like that. And this one is more like that. So when we talk about the height to the width, we're talking about the proportions and comparing the proportions of form. Now, you might say to me, but wait a minute, aren't you overlooking something? Shouldn't the ear be included in the proportions of the face? And shouldn't I really be talking about this distance? And isn't it actually more like a square than a skinny rectangle? And you're right. So I could talk about the proportions of the face, including the ears. And are the ears important? Well, what if the ear was smaller? Can you picture that? What if the ear was larger? Do we have an idea in the back of our minds about what size an ear should be relative to the head in general? A sense of, if we were doing a drawing, a painting, or sculpture, how big or small we would make it? Yes, we do. Does that notion carry over into other things which are ear-like? Are there other things that are ear-like? Well, let's consider a teacup. Is the teacup's handle ear-like? And is this cup, which I happen to use, coincidentally like an ear? Or is it very often that the handle of a cup is like an ear? Well, the fact of the matter is, with teacups, almost always the handle is like an ear. And in this case, if this was a face and that was the ear, then somebody might say, well, it's too big. That ear, if that's the face, if this is the face, well, then these ears just don't work. But the sense that the ear must be a certain size is so strong that this cup was made with a handle that the finger won't go through. Because if the finger would go through, then it would have to look like this. And we don't like shapes like that to that. Now, this is just one cup, but you can look at hundreds of teacups. Now, it happens to be that coffee cups don't follow exactly that rule. So here we have coffee cup, Get 2 fingers in. They say that there's a social reason for this, in that cups are designed this way because when people drink tea, they should hold the cup like that in a dainty kind of way, because drinking tea is a dainty thing to do 100 years ago. That's what some people have suggested. And other people think that coffee is a more masculine beverage, and so you need to get your fist on it, and both fingers need to be able to go through the cup, but even so, the shape is going to be like an ear to a face. Bigger face, bigger ear. Now, we can talk about the particulars of the proportions, not just the width to the height, which is, of course, the most important single consideration. But what about also the blue band to the yellow band? Could be bigger, could be smaller. If I was designing this cup and I showed it to the foreman of my factory, he might say, go back and do it over because I want the yellow to be there. I want the yellow bigger. It's a question of proportions. How big is this? Could it be like this? That's a question of proportions. Even the thickness of that blue line. How would the cup look if that blue line were that big? The proportions of these little white dots could be different. All those are considerations of comparing one size to another. When we change the proportions of an object, we change the height to the width. There are programs in computers nowadays that do that to people's faces to get a laugh. And so we come across it very often. So here's me, Halloween costume. Here is the width of my face, height of my face. This is, if I compare this to this, I'm talking about proportions. If I change the width and not the height, I get that. Here is Elke from a picture from a few years ago. Here is the height and the width. If I change the width and keep the height the same, I get this. Now, you have done this yourself on the computer by clicking on a adjustment to an image, which does this to you. And I've seen this image on your computer where the mouth is even bigger and goes like this. Because you can change the width to the height, but you can also change parts and make them bigger and smaller in a computer program which does it automatically. Here is Castle. Her face is very much a square, as is almost everyone's. Profile will fit in a square. I'm going to just check and make sure my camera is working. Yes, my camera is working. Now, what if we change the height and keep the width the same? Then we're going to get this. Now notice, not only does the height change relative to the width, but look at the ear. See how the ear has changed height to width. And the opening of the ear changes height to width. It's all artistic. It's all mathematical. It's all created. You create changes like this in a computer mathematically, and you can program it. But the idea of considering the proportions as a basis of height to width and the parts to each other is very ancient. It goes back, we have documents of it that go back 500 years. And were drawn by an artist named Albert Durer. These are Albert Durer's drawings done in the 1500s, which show a face profile. A face, what happens to the features and the overall size when you change the height to the width, 500 years ago. the width of the face and its parts compared to each other when you change the tall, skinny rectangle more to a square, which I did with a computer. They didn't have computers, they didn't have calculators, they had paper and pencil. They figured these things out. Now, Durer is interesting because he's in the news. This artist, 500 years ago, is in the news yesterday because they found one of Durer's drawings. It's a drawing of a woman sitting with an elaborate drapery. And somebody bought it at a tag sale for $30. And the article seems to imply that if it's a genuine Durer, it'll be auctioned and it could go for $50 million. Now, it's a little drawing, and they have to establish that he actually did it. But it's not far-fetched to think maybe not 50 million, but maybe 30 million would not be unusual. So that just reminds me to point out that something I said when I wrote that article about teaching you to play the piano, which was, drawings are worth money, aren't they? And that's very true. Oh, how about an assignment? The assignment is to draw a face. Front view, if you like, front view or profile. Then, make a note of the height to the width. Change the proportions significantly to make it more vertical or more horizontal, like Durer did, and redraw the face with different proportions. And you can, if you want, put a grid. I know you don't particularly like grids. You can put a grid in of 4 by 4 to make it more exact. He did he even changed the proportions of his rectangles within the grid. So that's your assignment, and now I'm going to go post it to YouTube. Talk to you Friday.